Okay, our speaker this afternoon is Sandy Bihn. Sandy is the Executive Director, Lake Erie Waterkeeper. She is also President of the Toledo Lighthouse Society. She was an elected member of the Oregon City Council for 5 terms and was elected to Oregon Clerk Auditor and then served as Finance Director for 10 years. To help Lake Erie, Sandy has developed working relationships with fishermen, boaters, waterfront property owners, and businessmen to advocate for improving Lake Erie water quality. Key programs include nutrients, algae, invasives, water levels, climate change, sturgeon, marshes, water quality report cards, water testing, education, and outreach. Sandy, since 2003, has been a member of the Great Lakes Collaboration and Healing Our Waters. She also works with the Lake Erie LAMP, L-A-M-P, Mommy AOC, and other organizations to benefit Lake Erie's waters. She served on the International Joint Commission, Great Lakes Water Quality Advisory Board. Sandy has been the Lake Erie Waterkeeper since 2005, which is a licensed program of the International Waterkeeper Alliance. In 2020, she managed a $638,000 grant to begin restoration of the Toledo Lighthouse. She has received many awards.
Sorry. See that. So so what happened in the 90s is Breberhoff came to Napoleon. It was dairy cows. And what I didn't know, and actually just recently kind of began to understand the enormity of this, is when we pastured our animals when they were out in the open fields, the cows and the pigs, the manure went on the ground, they were spread out more. The system seemed to balance itself reasonably well. I don't remember a whole lot of to do about that. But when they confine them, hogs and cows have too much poop, to be blunt, and they cannot put that size of poop easily on the fields. So they put it in lagoons, and 95% of what they're putting on the fields is liquid. So they're liquefying, which is a whole different animal, because when you think about our area that has tiles and ditches and whatever, when you put a liquid in, is a pathway right to the lake. And as I reflect on all this, I'm pretty certain that the turning point back then was these animals. And since then, the evidence has just grown exponentially. And by the way, you're welcome to ask questions as I move along. It doesn't bother me to be interrupted. There we go. So there's actually a lot of this information, and I can send a link to this afterwards. I found a wonderful report on CAFOs by someone who works for the national, I'm going to get the name wrong, but what it is local governments, health departments combining. And she works for, there's actually an organization of local government health departments. And someone who was in Bowling Green wrote about the CAFOs and in 2019, and her work is really good. And so a lot of this is from her resource. It was just, she did it well, and it's good to say. But what we need to understand is we ship from smaller family operated farms. Lots of people used to have animals and they would market them, and it was spread all over the landscape. And all of a sudden we confine them, and we no longer, have about 80% of the farmers who used to have animals no longer have them. And I think the other thing to note on here that's noted is milk production's doubled, meat production's tripled, egg production is quadrupled. So not only have we confined the animals, we're turning them over faster. So they're, we're feeding them more, we're pumping them up, everything is different. A 1920 chicken took approximately 16 weeks to reach 2.2 pounds. Today they reach 5 pounds in 7 weeks. That's just, I think, a grabber. I mean, it's just, so what we've done to our animals and how we've changed them is pretty profound. And so the current system pretty much rewards larger farms with lower costs and greater profit. and it's an incentive to increase farm size, and it's anti-family farms, I would say. Do you all know that the livestock industry is pretty much controlled by 5 multinational corporations? Those being Smithfield / WH in China, who bought them out, JBS, Tyson, Cargill, or some, they're just giants. And what they do, you never see their name on a permit or on these sites that we have in our watershed that I'll be talking about. What happens is they contract with an integrator, somebody who's in the area that knows the farmers. And then, they work with the farmers to have these contracts, and the contracts can be pretty, actually when they have the contracts, they supply the animal, they supply the feed, you have to put your buildings in certain things. Guess what they don't contract for? Manure. That's the only thing, is manure. So the responsibility, and that's pretty clever if you think about it, because if there's any increase in cost, it's going to go to the farmer and not the contractor. So they're going to squish their margins, which is really bad. So another thing on here, and I can give all you this, but what is a confined animal feeding operation? It's important to know this because we're not talking about family raised animals and regenerative farming and all those organic things that we all support and like. So an industrial agriculture facility raises animals usually at high density for the consumption of meat, eggs, or milk. To be a CAFO, a farm must be categorized an animal feeding operation. So the sole purpose of that facility is to feed them, pump them up, and whatever. And that's how the government says, and they have to have them confined for 45 days or more per year. So the animals are not allowed to move for 45 or more days. That's how you categorize and separate, family farms and livestock from what's happening today. The laws to regulate manure, and I'm delving more into this. It's interesting. The Clean Water Act in 1972 had a provision that CAFOs had to have a discharge permit like a wastewater plant would, and PDES permit as they're known. And I'm like, 1972, that's like 20 years before we ever saw a CAFO here. What were the CAFOs and how? I still haven't found the legislator or who actually put this in the Clean Water Act. That's my new mission, trying to figure this out. But it was the poultry industry in the 50s that started doing chickens and massive numbers of chickens. And it was because of the poultry industry and the pollution they were creating that this provision got put in the Clean Water Act, which, eventually morphed into hogs and cows and whatever. So the big thing again about them is the manure. Liquid manure contains only 5%. This is just how when they put the animals, it goes into a floor and then it drains either into a lagoon. In hog farms, it can be underneath it. There can be like cement things underneath it. They, kind of go into a slurry. They do some anaerobic digestion, and then they put them into tank trucks and they put the manure untreated, totally untreated in the fields. What I didn't put in this presentation that I need to add is that in China, of all places, and I always get a real, like, you got to be kidding me thing, which is my action to it too. In China, they are required to treat their manure. And in China, they limit the number of animals in a watershed. We do neither here. So when WH bought out Smithfield, the hogs that we have here so many of, what happened was it was cheaper, not only for the feed here, because of course our grain is cheaper. We have a lot of grain in this country. But also because the environmental regs in the US are less for manure than they are in China, which is pretty bad. So the nexus of this, just to kind of give you a perspective of how much is produced and what's going on, is if you look at the one, it says it's annual estimated the livestock animals in the US produce somewhere between 3 to 20 times more manure than the people. What is the difference between human sewage and animal sewage? And I would like to say the simple reality is human sewage is highly regulated. Have to have a septic system, have to treat it, have to whatever. Animal manure, it's all put in the ground untreated, and it's growing and it's changing, because when you feed them more and pump them up more, there's more stuff, even besides phosphorus and nitrogen, that's in the manure. So a human produces about 4.9 pounds of sewage a day on average. A beef cow, 59 pounds, a dairy cow, 80, and a chicken a lot less, obviously. But these animals produce a lot of waste. So this is a slide actually from the Ohio Department of Agriculture. And, I note that what I saw on the top of this, but this slide came as a result of some work we were doing on the Lake Erie Executive Order in the city of Perrysburg, when some of the Perrysburg Council didn't think they wanted to support it, and some didn't. But the Ohio Department of Ag came out and used this information. And ironically, sadly, the data for this came from a nonprofit group called Environmental Working Group report in 2019 that was really good, did satellite images and estimated the number of permitted and unpermitted facilities. And we come up with, we've had an 88% growth in the number of animals in the Maumee watershed between 2000, what does it say, 2 and 17. I can tell you between 17 and 23, they're growing. We're getting more and more. So it's not stopping. But this is the Ohio Department of Ag making these statements. So it's credible. And yet no one was telling the story until the environmental groups really started bringing out the facts. So here's what they do with it. They can drag line it as well as put it on the fields like that. That's not the point here, but it's just important to know that the number of factory farms, you know, more of them are unpermitted than permitted. There's been an 88% in the increase in the number of animals and the amount of phosphorus. I mean, there's just a lot going on with all these animals in our watershed. And I just, you know, I think the sad part about it is the family farmers, you know, are usually the ones that people think of are the producers. When I say, where does the algae come from, or what is the cause of the algae, usually the audience, 90% will tell me agriculture. And when I drill down and ask what it is, they'll say commercial fertilizer. And once in a while, an informed audience will say manure. The truth, folks, is that there's a huge difference between commercial fertilizer and manure. What's the difference? You buy commercial fertilizer, you have to pay for it. You don't have to buy it if you don't need it. Manure, it's a waste. You have to get rid of it. And you don't want to get rid of less, right? So there is a disincentive to help our environment, where the farmers have an incentive. And Farmer Bill, who's the head of our Waterkeeper organization, just spoke to Captors Group a couple days ago and basically said the amount of phosphorus he's putting on his fields has gone down substantially. The soils are different. They're managing them better. So the farmers are our friends. The family farmers are our friends and are helping the watershed. Please understand and underscore that, because the practices that we're doing and what we're doing is helping. Unfortunately, when they go down, the animals go up and the lake sees no benefit. That's pretty much what's going on. So here's where the factory farms are at in our watershed. This is from EWG, but you can just see they're peppered everywhere. I mean, they're mostly along the Indiana border. They cluster there. You can see down at the bottom by Grand Lake St. Mary's. But I mean, we're just, and there's constantly permits adding more and more and more. It's bad. 3.9, go ahead.
Who gives the permits? Who approves these?
The state of Ohio has a CAFO permit, what they call it, concentrated animal feed, for a certain size. If you're under 2,500 hogs, $24.99, you don't need a permit. If you're under 800 cows, you don't need a permit. If you're under, I think it's 120, the chickens are boilers and layers, and I always get them confused. 120,000 chickens, you don't need a permit. So you can be one unders, and a lot of the facilities, over half, are one unders, so they don't have to have any regulations. But I would argue that even the ones that have the permits, it's all the same problem, because you'll see in a little bit what the science is now telling us about these operations. But they're just, and these were not here. I mean, what you're looking at here has come since the 90s, folks. These are all stuff that's located in the Maumee watershed. And so, it's a problem. And then you get something like this. This was Luna Pier last fall. I mean, you get in the Portage River in the fall, they were applying liquid manure, and that's what happened to the river right after. Reported it to Ohio EPA and the Ohio Department of Agriculture. They said it was permitted and there was nothing that could be done. So what we found now is that, there's been more and more science. We're all asking, so what is the basis? And is there science that actually says this is a problem? Because that's what you always buck against. You can't prove that it's a problem. Well, it's kind of like 1 and 1 or 2. If you're producing, if you have I liked the last slide. I should go back up to the one here, the one down on the Portage River. The farmer there had a Wood County Department of Health official come to his house and order him to clean up his septic system. At the time he was there, they were tanking manure all around this guy's farm. So here there's untreated manure going on in huge volumes. Not to say that septic systems shouldn't be changed and operating. Please don't hear that. Not to say a wastewater plant doesn't need to clean up its act and stop the overflows. Please don't hear that either. Because all of those, we all need, don't put phosphorus on your lawn if you use fertilizer. I mean, there's all kinds of ways we can all help. But this is the giant, this is the elephant in the room, if you will, on the issue. This was and the same thing was true when algae was done with laundry detergent in the 60s and 70s. All of the other elements were there, all important to reduce. But the giant in the room was the laundry detergent. The giant in the room now is the manure, especially liquid manure. But it's really, I think, bad when you have an inspector coming out and telling you have to fix your septic system. And I think there are only 2 people in the house. So it's 4.6, you saw the numbers a day, right? I mean, the amount of sewage they're producing ain't much. And yet land applying liquid manure all around him, untreated, nothing done. So think about that.
I have a question. So all this, so that person, for example, putting in a new septic system, they get their water possibly from a well. And I mean, growing up on a farm, we had a well, and our well was 90 feet deep. How does all that manure affect their well waters and all these places? Please repeat the question.
Okay, so the question was, how does manure affect well water when you have a well on your property? Excuse me, the answer is the only way you know is either if you test the water before the CAFO comes in and test it after. That's the best thing you can do for nitrates, because that is the issue predominantly. And we find nitrates in the water quite often from these CAFOs. They're problems. Often people don't test and don't know, because nitrates, there's no odor, there's no taste, there's no way of knowing. So it could be there and affecting your health, and you may not know unless you test for it. And if you test for it, then you have to do DNA sampling to prove it's from there's all kinds. The system isn't wanting to help with this issue. Let me just put it that way. So we did a study. We got a foundation grant from some people in California who don't want their names given out, but we went to Professor Raft and Meyer. Raft is from the University of Wisconsin and Meyer from Marquette. And I probably should have put more of this information here, but they went and looked at all the monitoring data, because there's a lot of monitoring wells, continuous monitoring wells in the Maumee watershed. So they went upstream, downstream, and they looked for DRP, not total, because dissolved phosphorus is the one we want to really get the numbers down on. And they went through the watershed, and what they found was whenever you added a CAFO, you added 10 to 15% more dissolved phosphorus downstream. So there's the monitoring data. Now, will Ohio EPA, I forced them literally to put it in the report, because we had the report. I'm saying it's valid information. It's 2 professors, put it in, but they won't factor it in. It's not considered. And then just recently, in the last couple months, for the TMDL, the Clean Water Act stuff that's going on with Lake Erie, Western Lake Erie, Julie Weatherington Rice, who worked with me on a landfill issue in EnviroSafe way back when, for anybody that remembers that, did a soil analysis for liquid manure and showed what was going on. And she basically is saying in all this here that she's summarizing that when you put liquid manure on the fields, it just goes down into the tile drains or it goes into the groundwater, the aquifers or whatever, and it gets into the groundwater. It's not going to the crops unless you actually put the manure down when you plant the crop and at the time the crop really needs it. She has written the Ohio Department of Agriculture and told them that their laws are wrong and that they're not protective of the environment. And the head of the Ohio Department of Agriculture has passed it along to Soil and Water and to the CAFO group. We suspect they'll do nothing with it but here's science. There's 2 scientists that are now saying, when you put a CAFO in, it's causing a problem. You shouldn't be doing it, because when you put the manure down, it's really not attaching to the fields at all anyway. Shouldn't be doing it. It's going to hurt the water, and Lake Erie is never going to recover. So, I kind of want to wrap this up in some ways and have a discussion. We have a conference May 4th. If you're more interested in this in the work here, we have Keith Schneider from Circle of Blue, who's doing a lot of great work on the watershed and on the issue of agriculture. I think, folks, what we're looking at and that we're not really understanding is, and it's a Lake Erie problem, but it's a national problem as well. And that is that we've switched from family farms, they're buying up all this land, and to corporate farms, contracted farms. And Kennedy, who was the head of the Waterkeeper group, I mean, he gave a wonderful speech, and I didn't quite hit home until I thought about it with regard to this. And he said, when you lose your family farms, you lose your democracy because you don't control your food. And, you know, more and more we're going to corporate farms and international organizations who could give a hoot about you and I. Sorry, they're about the money. And, you know, if we don't take hold of this, how are we going to, Lake Erie is in trouble. It's not going to recover. And, you know, every year, you know, the other thing I didn't put up here is, so in July of every year, most of you know that the Ohio Sea Grant has at Gibraltar brings in all the scientists, and they do this big dog and pony show. And what is that dog and pony show about? How much algae are we going to have this year? Is it going to be a big bloom or a small bloom? Is it going to be toxic? Is it not going to be toxic? Are we going to treat it? We're going to do more studies to study the toxins in the algae. What's wrong with that picture? There is nothing in that meeting that talks about how much has been reduced, how much of the 40% have we gained, where are we at, what are we doing? It doesn't happen. And so, you know, until we start getting real source reduction and, you know, figuring that out, we're in trouble. And I put up here a couple things. You know, we're at the board meeting we're having this evening and the annual meeting we're having for Waterkeeper. I'm going to ask the board to finally say, you just have to treat the manure. I don't care if you take methane out of it, but you have to reduce the fertilizer or the phosphorus. If you take the methane out, you have to take the phosphorus out too, because methane produces, the biodigesters produce something called digestate, which has more concentrated phosphorus, which are then taking back and putting in the fields. And it's like, no. You know, Bill Myers at Marcy's meeting the other day said to the federal government, NRCS, which is part of the United States Department of Agriculture, he said, you know, so in your programs, we're using less and less phosphorus. We're precision agging, we're using less and less, you know, we're doing good at that. He said, and your rules for how much phosphorus we can put on the fields, what they call 590 standards, are going down. So they started out, when I started, with about 50, now they're down to 30, even 20. So they're really going down, right, as to how much phosphorus you should put in your soils. He said, so what are you doing with manure? And they're like, and the guy agreed that the numbers are going down for phosphorus for commercial fertilizer. And he said, for manure, we're not touching it. It's what the crops will uptake. Well, folks, we've got a scientist saying it's not uptaking really anything. And yet, and no one knows how much it's uptaking, right? It's all nebulous. And these are federal standards coming down through the state of Ohio, through the system. It's just a real problem. If you're concerned about this and you think this is an issue, I'd like to know from you, and for you to share with me in the rest of this time, if possible, what bullets can I put on a coaster? I think I bought some here. We have Lake Erie Facts, but I'm going to make a manure CAFO, whatever. What grabbers of this conversation, if there were any, if you were talking to someone else, what would be the top things you would say to someone else? Can you get this conversation? Can I tweak this some other way? Can I give you fact sheets? Can I go to your meetings? Can you get a boating club, a garden club, whatever? We need, you know, what I learned from laundry detergent is it was the local governments. It was from the beginning, from the bottom up. We are the bottom up folks, and we ain't getting anywhere. You know, I love Mike Ferner's group and I love his signs. You know, he does, you know, his heart is in it. His facts are right. But it takes more than that. It takes a lot of us, and it takes a lot of just conversations between your family and friends. And the summer's coming. This is an opportune time. Maybe at Gibraltar, we all say, you know, we get, maybe, I don't know if the league would sign on, maybe I'll write a letter saying, it's fine that you give us the algae forecast, what I call the doom and gloom forecast every year, but we want to know what programs are working to reduce it. We want to know what you're doing with manure. Why are you allowing more animals to come in the watershed? Call them out. Because
it's like they're not doing the root cause analysis.
There's no source. And the program that they have now, H2 Ohio, I didn't put that up here, but H2 Ohio is called Best Management Practices. So like the algae forecast in the lake, what are best management practices? They're practices to manage phosphorus after it's in the ground, or the water. So, they're practices to keep it from going into the water, but they're not stopping it, the initial part of it. You understand what I'm saying? So there's no reduction of what's coming into the system. There's better management after it's in the system. No watershed. I would argue that the Clean Water Act in the 70s, the miracle of it was that they told industries, and I can kind of remember that time when industries were going, oh my God, it's going to cost us a ton of money. You have to have discharge permits, and you can't put mercury in the water, and you can't put heavy metals, and you can't put, so much limits. It's not perfect, but it's better. And you know what? They all did it. It's all in the product that we pay. Nobody, and this system, we're paying them. We're not seeing reductions. I don't get it. It's agriculture. It's because of the way the US, and by the way, Canada, Ontario, which I studied because of the IJC. There's a guy up there that's just terrific. So Ontario had, I don't know if any of you remember Walkerton some years ago, where people actually died because of the E. coli got into the water and it killed people. And so it spooked them. That'll get you. The good thing about the Toledo water crisis is we have no proof that anyone died, which is a good thing. We don't have real hard proof that anyone really got super sick from it. I mean, there's no science. There's, some people suggest that, yeah, maybe, but it didn't kill people. Sorry, it didn't do that. But in Walkerton, it did. And so the people in Ontario were like spooked. And so their local governments are like, no shit on the ground here from the animals. Don't put it there. So there was a outcry. And 10 years later, they created rules for the farm community, and they have quotas up there. They have a different system. They don't subsidize their ag like they do here. But they required that the amount of phosphorus in the soils for commercial fertilizer and for manure be the same, called the agronomic rate. We don't do that. And because of that, a dairy cow facility, the maximum number of cows there is about 500. We have thousands here. And the reason for that is to spread the manure and keep the soil down. You need more acreage, right? And so the economic balance in Ontario is 500 cows, where you can actually put it close enough where you can still manage it. And if your numbers start getting too high, they go out and buy more land. So it's actually increased the value of the land in proximity to these things and kind of had a good residual, it's a good effect. But, China does it. Ontario does it. The US does not do it. And meat and dairy is, I've worked on oil and gas. I remember Mary from BP. I was on a community group in Oregon. And at the end of the meeting, she always go, how's Lake Erie doing? And I'm like, oh, this damn CAFO thing. It's so hard to find any information. I mean, we didn't have the numbers like I showed you today until 2019. All these animals were growing exponentially and none of us knew it. I mean, I knew it because I saw the permits, but I couldn't give you the size and scale of it. It took NGOs to do this, not the government, not the universities, sadly. It's strange. I mean, Chris Winslow from Ohio State at Marcy's meeting the other day put up the word fertilizer. He never put up the word manure, not even on the damn, pardon me, but it makes me mad, on the screen. To me, that's just dishonest. I mean, I realize he needs to keep his job, and I realize the state of Ohio is supportive of ag and livestock, but that's bull. That's just bull. And so, anyway, I shouldn't have said that probably because that's going to get me in trouble, but wouldn't be the first time it's recorded. So anyway, but, so I guess, are there things out of this that beckon you to want to do something, or is this just kind of another flat speech that it's informative, it's interesting, I'm going to go home and get on my merry way? Are you feeling wanting? And if so, what are the highlights of what you heard that I need to put on a fact sheet, on a coaster, and on other information I'm giving out? I'm actually, on Saturday, we're getting an award from the Ohio Outdoors Association. And so in Delaware, Ohio, Waterkeeper is. And I get an opportunity to speak to writers, freelance writers across the state. And so I want to give them the most compelling information to get their interest, right? Because, Dan Egan, who just wrote the book on phosphorus, I helped him with information, not much, but we had conversations and we still email back and forth. Doug Brinkley, who writes a lot of stuff, is coming to Perrysburg May 13th, and talk to him. There was a case in Oklahoma that I'm watching that I'm fascinated by. The state of Oklahoma sued Tyson, the chicken farms, for poultry pollution in the Illinois River in Arkansas. So the Illinois River runs through Arkansas. I have no idea what, I can't see this, but it's there. So they sued them. 17 years later, in January of this year, the federal court ruled in favor of the state of Oklahoma. And they told Tyson that they had to stop their poultry pollution. They were supposed to have a plan to do that because it goes downstream into Oklahoma, just to finish that sentence. So Illinois River, Arkansas, Illinois River, Oklahoma, one upstream, one downstream, kind of like the Maumee, you know, Defiance, Toledo, whatever you want to picture it as. They got a 90-day extension, but you know, maybe it's something like that that can, because if that happens, then I think it has a ripple effect. I'm hoping, but every time I hope, they're so powerful, they just flip it all upside down and it doesn't happen. So it's frustrating.
Maybe you can use the time from the beginning of the case to the adjudication with you said that
Took 17 years. They sued under RCRA, they sued under Circle. I've read a lot of it. I mean, I need to study it more because I'm thinking it would be good if there was a local ordinance that maybe did the same thing, that maybe we could start that here. But we tried an executive order, which they did in Chesapeake Bay. We got 12 communities to sign on to it. US EPA kind of poo-pooed it. Maybe they'll come back with a TMDL. I don't know. We got a guy in Milford, Ohio, who he was going to have 7,500 hogs located right next to his property. And he was upset. And he learned about the permit before it got issued. And so, you know, he came to me and like, Sandy, what can I do? And I'm like, you know, he said, I'll go get a petition. I'll put signs out. And I'm like, yeah, I hate to tell you this, but I don't think you're going to get anywhere. I don't think all the signs in the world, maybe I'm wrong. So we ended up putting together a resolution to the Board of Trustees, the township, little community, little, 4 trips, 2 hours each time, 1 hour there, 1 hour back. And the township trustees were wonderful, and they actually opposed it and then required things. That permit's still not been issued. So, you know, we try different tactics to get these addressed, but every time now there was 8,000 cows going to Steuben County, Indiana 2 months ago. The Board of Zoning Appeals in Steuben County turned it down, but in the literature they gave, all the manure was going to Eden, Ohio and Temperance, Michigan. So I'm like, how does that work? So you got a Indiana facility, the shit going to Ohio and Michigan. Who knows what, I mean, and you know, they basically, it was JBS, who now, by the way, you know, I'll leave you with this and I'll shut up and try to listen for a minute, but JBS is the largest cattle beef producing company in the world. They're out of Brazil. And JBS has facilities in Kansas and Texas. Guess where they want to locate now? They want to move them out of Kansas and Texas and move them here in the Midwest to Ohio, Michigan, and Indiana. We need more shit like a hole in the head. And it's just very frustrating for me to sit here and tolerate. I mean, there's a point at which it's like, hello, I mean, where is the breaking point here? And it's very hard. It's a tough pill to swallow, but it's reality. And all you can do is tell the truth and hope that it'll resonate and whatever. So maybe I can start with you. Is there anything here that you've heard that was grabbing enough or anything? What was anything?
Well, the first thing on the slide, it showing the depth of Lake Erie. I've just not seen it illustrated that way. How shallow it is. I appreciate that. I didn't see how deep Lake Michigan was. I was trying to figure out that.
Well, the lake, Michigan and Huron are connected. They're actually one lake. They talk about them in 2 different lakes, but that one there. But yeah, but the thing about it is, what you need to know is we're lucky in Erie in a way, because when we get sick quicker because we're shallower and it impacts us more. When you have a deeper lake, if all the shit, that's happening in those lakes will not have the quicker effect that they're having here, because there's more water, there's less concentration. And so the residual effect over time is going to be less in those lakes than it's going to be here. But it accumulates, and if it's not corrected and nothing's done, then, you know, so Lake Erie is like, I call it the canary in the coal mine for the Great Lakes, because we're the one, yeah.
So I hear you saying that we should go local that's more effective, sometimes you try to deal with the state.
Mhm.
With the state, why is this? Just the.
It's because people power, what I learned in the laundry detergent situation, I haven't studied a lot of other, advocacy kinds of programs, just because this is the one. But the history tells us that it was the local governments and it was the people, it was women. Isn't that often the case? Sorry. But, kind of, pushed it up and made the case for the phosphorus and laundry detergent, and went to their city councils and started in their groups and their civic groups and other organizations and started making waves about it and saying, we've got to do something. And, we build up that because all of us are multipliers, right? So every group we're in, every church organization, there's a lot of different kinds of organizations that can be effective in messaging this. And if we say, treat the manure, don't keep adding it, we can't keep killing the lake, it's wrong. And, this is toxic. I mean, microcystin is toxic. And there's a new toxin that came at the fall last year. I haven't really read up much on it yet, but it stayed longer and it was worse. And, as climate change is happening, you'll have to believe that that might even get worse than what it's been. Don't know. You?
We just came together, the three of us, on the way over. How can you as Lake Erie Waterkeeper, the years that you dedicated of your life to doing that, how can you continue to be upbeat and you know that the state is supporting these capitals more than looking after the lake? It seems like it's just such an uphill battle.
The answer to that is simply, I feel an obligation. And as you can see, I'm getting older and older, and I'm totally frustrated with this because I'm not used to it taking this long. We worked on the Coke plant. There was a board meeting with the Coke plant. I'll never forget it. And Dr. I can't think of his name, kind of eccentric, but a wonderful guy, chemistry guy from UT. He came to the meeting and I asked that we ask for upgrades to what they had to do to treat the stuff in the Coke plant for the emissions that were going to come out of it. And the people there just went after me and said, no, we got to oppose it. And I said, permits are meant to be granted. The law says if you do this and this and this, you will get a permit. And so he convinced everybody that to go my way. And actually we got the largest mercury requirement in the country for that Coke plant. It was never built. Fast forward to the fish kills and the power plant at Bayshore Power. We were very close to getting cooling towers there until they closed 3 of their units. We've had, there's been, trying to think of the other ones, but we've had like 3 or 4 different open lake dumping. That's the one I'm not happy about. We combined with National Wildlife Federation. All of these took 3-5 years. I mean, they weren't quick. What we saw progress, and I can see this now though, with the scientists and the information we have coming to a head. You can't deny it anymore. I mean, they can keep pushing their head back, but the facts are strong, the information's strong, but we just need more grassroots. And the other thing is during COVID, we got a deal in a house in the Bahamas. I leave for 3 months a year. From January through March, I do virtual stuff and I do communicate and do all my newsletters and whatever. But that gives me a little respite from this because the doom and gloom of the winter to me is burdensome and hard for me to cope with. So I love water. I feel an obligation to do it. I really want to get over this hump so I don't have to work this hard. So that's selfish on my part, but I'm committed. I'm not going to quit until that lake's not green like it is. Just not.
Excuse me, we have to stop.
Okay, sorry.
Well, Sandy, would you like to make one more closing comment before we stop our recording?
If anyone has suggestions on highlights or things that you're going to share out of this conversation, the key points that will resonate with your neighbors and friends and family, please let me know, because if I can message it better, get more people involved, we'll be more successful in what we're doing. It's on the Lake Erie Waterkeeper website. There's also a newsletter here for people here who would like it. And we have if you're interested in the subject, We have a conference in Perrysburg at WW Night, May 4th. So here's information on the conference.
We are in the process of posting that on our website.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sandy, what good could the manure be used for? Doesn't it fertilize the crops?
Well, see, that's the name of the game.
Like, I understand, but it does bad. Now, what could it be good for?
That's just what I was gonna say. I was gonna say my thing. The name of the game that's out there is that manure is a fertilizer. And these other fertilizers that are out there, everything's okay with those. And so why isn't